And Stephen, I want to bring you here. We've heard it mentioned several times: regulation, legislation that exists. And when I'm listening to what Leila is saying, a lot of what she's talking about, we assume sits within the legislative space. What kind of enabling environment do we need from a legislative, regulatory perspective to allow the film industry to thrive?
Thank you, Nziki. And yes, what you need from a regulatory, when we speak about an enabling regulatory and legislative framework, it really is a framework that invites investment into the sector. And this is such an important time for the country. It's such an important time for creatives. Creatives were some of the hardest hit, by the pandemic. And what I like about what's happening here is we're having more of an economic discussion, and the previous speakers have all sort of mentioned that. And I like the fact that, Tafisa, that you spoke to the need, not only the potential for this industry to deliver as a key driver of economic growth, but also transformation. Very important objectives for the country and for nation building as well. So there's so many prospects of actually moving in the right direction quickly. And if we look at the numbers that Leon put on the screen a moment ago, it's absolutely staggering how much investment can actually flow into not only the film industry, but also the satellite economies that it feeds, and how many jobs it can create. And you don't actually need a university degree to work on a set, to build a set, to be a costume designer, to learn skills. But what do we need from the regulatory and legislative space is, of course, a space where investors feel comfortable to bring that high-level investment. I mean, Leon's screen spoke of one feature film that has a budget of $220 million. Now, as an intellectual property lawyer, what people who look to invest heavily in creating new works of high quality and value, what they look at, there's a number of key factors. One is certainty in law. So what you need from a film perspective and as a producer is you need to be comfortable that you can actually plan accurately a financial layout from beginning to end fairly accurately so you can work in a particular budget. You need to feel comfortable that there's an environment that allows for contractual flexibility, because each project is different. You've got different size of the budget available. You might actually there's differences between the rights models, the remuneration models, and the amount of people that you employ, whether it's a feature film, television series, animation project, or a documentary feature, for instance. So you need contractual flexibility, and you also need to have an environment where, very importantly, you are able to unify rights in the producer. The reason why that's important is our laws are quite out of date and they need to be updating. They need to be modernized, but it also needs to be recognized that works, copyright protected works, for instance, like films, are not created like they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. Most works of high quality, high value, high investment yield are actually multi-authored works where you don't have one copyright owner. You can have 20, you can have much more. If you an example that just comes to mind, if you like gaming and you actually get through a PlayStation game right to the end. They're quite difficult nowadays, but I do it every now and again. Have a look at the amount of people who actually contributed to the creative process. And the same in film. Have a look at the names as they come up on the credits. So unless you can unify rights in the producer or in a central space from where work can be commercialized, it actually ups the risk profile for a particular shooting destination. And then lastly, I think an important aspect is that you need to be able to enforce your rights. If you invest a high level into a specific market and you create a product of value, you need to be able to feel comfortable that there's adequate legal protections for you to stop people who actually like piracy, combat piracy, especially online. And those four areas that I mentioned now, unfortunately, if we look at some of the key legislative proposals that are advanced to actually regulate the space moving forward, in the copyright bill that was mentioned a few times, it actually falls flat, unfortunately, on all 4 of those areas. It doesn't allow producers to unify rights in projects. It actually, the Performance Bill contains a provision that says after 25 years, each and every actor that made a sound on set gets the exclusive rights to further commercialize the film from there. So if you look at overseas markets, let's say the United States, where the life of copyright in a work is 70 years, and you now say to those businesses who want to invest here that you might lose the ability to actually further commercialize your work after a third of the lifespan that you used to, in your home country or internationally, where does that place your risk profile? So that's the problem from those legislative proposals, is that it actually increases South Africa's risk profile to a point where investment might not follow. Insofar as contractual flexibility is concerned, there's a horrible clause in the Copyright Bill called a contract override provision that says if any benefit is afforded to you in terms of the bill, you cannot waive it even if you want to. And it applies to scriptwriters, it applies to musicians who compose for film. So for the let's say the next Black Panther movie, you're approached as a musician or a scriptwriter to do the script or the score for the film. And in return, there's an offer of $5 million. That's a life-changing amount of money. That could be 100 million rand for you in the current economic climate. But in return, they want a full buyout of the rights so they can actually unify the rights into the producer. In terms of this contract override provision, it says you cannot do that deal. The local artist cannot, even if the money is there for him or her to accept, cannot accept the offer because the contract override provision says you cannot waive any of these protections. And there's a 25-year reversion right in terms of the Copyright Bill that says after 25 years you get your rights back if you're a musician or a writer. That sounds good for the musician or the writer, but do you see how important contractual flexibility is? There has to be an opportunity for the creative to say, I actually choose option B. And there's multiple, the Copyright Bill will actually turn the entire AV sector in South Africa completely on its head, because not only does it disenfranchise all producers of AV content because they cannot actually own the rights beyond 25 years, it makes it very difficult for them to do so in most productions. It also restricts their ability to choose contractually how they want to deal with their works. And then lastly, there's additional provisions which places administrative burdens on production companies and places huge risk for them. There's new statutory royalty schemes that will come in for performers. Any performer that steps on set that basically makes a sound now needs to share in the profits generated from a film, whether that film has made a net profit or not. So in an industry where the majority of works actually might never turn a profit, how much pressure does that put local production companies under when they've got this additional burden to start paying out money on unsuccessful projects from the past, present, and also on future? And just to cap it all off, there's a new sort of proposal that folks need to actually report to actors before any act of commercialization occurs. It's a and the penalties for non-reporting, we don't really know who to report to or in what format, are so severe that the directors of an entertainment company or a production house can actually potentially go to jail for 5 years if not reporting to each and every actor before each and every act of commercialization. And if you think about nowadays on-demand content services, they can show millions show millions of times and thousands at the same time. So it's just unfeasible. And what it creates is an environment where, and by the way, companies can be fined up to 10% of their annual turnover if found that they don't comply with that requirement. So when the unfortunate reality is, especially if you look at international investment, international studios and international stakeholders who want to invest heavily in South Africa have people like me that they talk to on their side in their countries. And whether you like lawyers or not, they will always assess assess risk and what all of these provisions do. And by the way, government's intention isn't bad. Government's intention is actually very good. That's the positive we have here, is that we all want the same thing. We want this industry to take off. And I think the fact that President Ramaphosa sent the bills back to Parliament for further consideration gives us an opportunity and gives the producers community another bite at the cherry to actually constructively engage with government and to say, by the way, let's bring the economic discussion in the room, because there's been too many ideological arguments advanced by people. Government didn't know what to make of everything, and in the end, the economic argument was actually missing in it. How do we get investment in? Speak to the producers who know how to. People like Leila sitting here can tell you how she can secure this investment. Let her be some of these people who speak with government, experts from industry, captains of industry, and that's how we can actually get the legislative framework back on track. But any talk of having bills enacted now and we can fix the problems later, forget it. Investors will run for the hills if you don't give them certainty in law, if you don't make sure that they can protect their investments, and if you don't actually give them contractual flexibility and a way to unify rights in projects. Thanks.
So that's another good example of good intentions, but poor alignment, right? And we're needing not just to have the framework there, but we need clarity on how this particular thing is going to be executed. And if you don't have an idea of how you're going to execute, that also makes people very nervous.